Welcome to the Narrate podcast, where we aim to tell God's story with our lives. We'll be continuing to post the Sunday message each week, but we want to dive a little deeper and offer some content to supplement your life with God, and that's where our Beyond Sunday series comes in. Join Adam and Narrate staff as they provide thoughtful discussions, ideas, and interviews that go beyond the message you'll hear on Sunday.
Hey, so I'm sitting here with JoLin Poppler. Some of you may or may not know JoLin. If you don't, you should, because she's fantastic. Has been a really crucial owner around Narrate for a long time. Has been super helpful to Hannah. Often covers Hannah when Hannah's on vacation or otherwise gone. Spends the full day with us at Ales for Trails. She's just the best. And we recently finished up a process where we invited her to join us on council. And so in an effort to tell stories and know one another through this platform, I asked JoLin to come in, and we just sat down and had a conversation around her and her background and her faith context and all those things. So I'm really excited for you to hear more about her story, and for those of you who haven't met JoLin yet, a chance to meet her. So thanks, JoLin, for being here. I mean, you've been around, how long have you and Tony been at Narrate?
So we got married in 2015. But we started coming before we got married, so probably sometime in 2014. And I was still in Bozeman then.
Okay.
I didn't move here till January of 2015, so I would come back and forth a lot. I was commuting back and forth for about a year before we got married.
So when did you and, pre-Narrate, when did you and Christ connect?
Oh, well, I would say growing up with, I guess, mostly my mom's side of the family, I don't ever recall a time in my life with having a question of, Christ being part of my life or believing or having faith. It was just something so ingrained in my mom's side of the family. Growing up Mexican, Catholic, huge family. My grandma.
Your mom's Mexican?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, huge family. Even though we moved to Montana when I was young, we still went down to see my family quite a bit.
And that's Southern California?
So when I was really young, it was California, and then they moved to Arizona. Oh. But I think my grandma was a big influence, even though she didn't know it. But she had a Mary statue before you walked in their front door. Mm-hmm. But in her bedroom, she had, not to sound like it was weird or anything, but she just had this, she had cleared out the closet and put a shelf in there, and it was basically her place to go pray. And she had the shelf or the counter, and she would light her candles, and she had a rosary, and she would put our pictures there. Wow. And I remember me and my cousins always sneaking in to see whose picture was up there, who was she praying for? Wow. What did we do? So yeah, it was always a part of my life. I wouldn't say.
So were you raised Roman Catholic?
I was raised Catholic, yes.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And I wouldn't say we were real great about going to church all the time. It was kind of rare because it was definitely my mom, not my dad.
Okay.
But even living in Montana growing up, still First Holy Communion and going to CDC and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Probably not the CDC, because that's the Center for Disease Control.
No, CCD, yeah.
I did that as well. Wow.
Yeah, CCD.
So when did you, because we met you not in a Roman Catholic context, so how did you journey from Roman Catholicism to, to Narrate?
Yeah. So I would say the most memorable things in my Christian life were my grandma when I was really young. Going through everything in the Catholic Church wasn't actually that memorable to me or that impactful to me. It was just more of a routine. In high school, and I grew up in a small town in Montana.
Where was that?
Whitehall.
Oh, yeah, I knew that.
Yeah. And there was a couple that started Young Life in Whitehall. And that was so impactful on me. I mean, they're two just very amazing people. I wouldn't be the person I am today without either of them.
Hmm.
And Young Life was just really impactful to me. And while I had always, belief or faith was never a question in my mind, I think what came with Young Life, and I just remember at one of the camps one summer, the thing that really came to me from that was, the real meaning of forgiveness, or the value of that. Like, you don't have to hold shame, and, you can be forgiven, and the grace of God, and just that feeling, like, that had never, that came to me through Young Life, I think.
Wow. Because
So,
did you go to, that was at one of their camps, you said?
yeah.
Huh.
I went to a lot of their camps.
Wow.
And it was really awesome, and they were all impactful in different ways, but that was the first camp. I think it was in Minnesota, and then I went to one in Canada, and then
So you went to Malibu then?
Malibu,
Wow.
Castaway, and then also did in a smaller group, I can't remember what they called those camps, but it was sailing through the San Juan Islands.
Whoa.
And then did the Beyond Malibu, where you're just up in the mountains
Wow.
for, yeah.
Interesting.
And those really taught you more about quiet time and just kind of following the grace of God. Yeah, so Young Life, super impactful. And then when I went to college in Bozeman, there was Young Life there. And I can't remember how I got connected. Maybe through friends,
In college?
perhaps. I can't remember for sure. But when I was in college, I was a Young Life leader.
Okay.
And that was super fun. And it was very time consuming, but it was very enjoyable. Like at lunch hours, we'd go to the high school and
Wow.
meet with kids, and going to their sporting events and theater events, and just meeting with them once a week, and took some kids to camp, and
Wow.
just great learning experience. Great for the kids, great for my own growth. And then I got away from it for quite a while, and that was probably like starting a career, getting busy with something different in life after I graduated.
Because you owned a business in Bozeman, right?
I did,
Yeah.
with 3 partners.
Okay.
I worked there for 18 years. So I started that actually in college.
Whoa.
So that's probably, when I started career that I got out of being a leader at Young Life.
Sure.
But then later, it was probably 10 or 15 years later. How old am I? I don't know. Let's say 10. Again, I don't remember how I reconnected, but they were looking for someone to be on the Young Life committee, the adult committee. So then I did that
In Bozeman.
in Bozeman
Yeah, wow.
for a little while also. And friends connected me to Journey Church
Oh, okay.
in Bozeman. So,
And did you attend there?
yep.
Okay, you did. Okay.
Yep. And it probably maybe like 5 years before I moved to Helena.
Okay. So you were there during the Hopkins years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brian Hopkins was also very impactful in my life, which I'm sure he doesn't know, or maybe he does. There's been times when I've stopped and told him, but having a congregation that big, you might not recognize it. But there are some of his sermons that still come to my mind in daily life. So
Your story in like high school and like being brought up Roman Catholic and then high school reminds me of, so as a staff we're starting to review last year's Think Talks again to see if we could do another one of those events. And the one of them we watched yesterday was this woman, I think she teaches psychology at Columbia, and she's got a book out, I think it's called the Science of Spirituality, and she's got all these brain images and stuff where she's arguing that life with God is 1/3 nature and 2/3 nurture. But one of the comments she made that definitely kind of landed with my own experience of reality is she said,
the research would say there's 3 major bridges, she called them, in the spiritual life. One is the bridge into young adulthood, the other is the bridge into middle ageness, and the third one is the bridge into, I can't remember what she called it, but becoming elderly. That those are the 3 like crucial places, she says, where we really have to have Christian community, and that kind of makes or breaks us, makes or breaks people in whether or not they nurture a life with God, is in specifically those 3 areas, having people in our lives. Which, on some level, your story parallels that of just young life scooping you up at this crucial time and bridging, because that's where I struggle even as we think about youth group, and we've talked about this on council, is what parts of that are successful and which parts aren't. And interesting that so the bridge for you from Roman Catholicism was these awesome people. You weren't loyal to Young Life, you were just relationally connected to them and then became loyal to Young Life, it sounds like.
Yeah, and they were just very involved in our small community, and I did lots of stuff with them and their family outside of Young Life. Like their middle son was the same age as me, and we were good friends. And
was your mom ever threatened by the non-Roman Catholic nature of that?
I don't think so. She doesn't regularly attend church, but has just some very spiritual traditions.
Okay.
So I don't think it.
So she's still alive in Whitehall?
In Butte.
Oh,
yeah.
Sweet. Even better. I love Butte. So then how did you and Tony meet?
How did me and Tony meet? This is another place in my spiritual life that's significant. I feel like when I jumped into my career, I really just jumped into my career and my business. And that's what I did. And it consumed me. Not in a bad way. I loved what I did. I loved the people that I worked with, the families that our business supported. But it was pretty all-consuming. And I remember one day, I literally remember the day where I was standing, that I just stopped and had a moment, and I just prayed to God, like, I want someone to go through life with.
Whoa.
And it was probably 3 or 4 months later.
So this was in your 30s that you prayed that prayer?
Oh yeah. When Tony and I got married, I was 37 or 38.
Wow.
Yeah.
And a few minutes later, you met Tony at a Cats game?
Oh, he worked with one of my college roommates here in Helena.
Oh, okay.
One of my college roommates moved here after college, and they worked together. And they were just talking one day, and he had been divorced like a year and was just talking to her about, hard to meet women at this age. And he's like, well, she said, I don't know how this works, but here's my friend's phone number and email address. And
no way.
Yeah.
So he just cold called you?
He emailed me.
He emailed you?
Yeah.
What did he say?
No, it was really long. I still have it.
Wow.
I still remember it. Tony's very organized, detailed, thorough type of person. Type A, I guess you would say. So he just said, Dawn gave me your number, our girlfriend, and told me about himself and, about his daughter, and it would be good to meet sometime. So.
Wow. He must have stalked you on Facebook or something before he did this.
Oh, Tony doesn't have Facebook.
Wow.
Tony doesn't have any social media. So no, he didn't have any stalking capabilities besides asking my friend about me.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So you got this email and...
Yeah, he sent me an email, and then he was going to be in Bozeman for work, so we met for coffee. And if you ask, you'll just have to ask him the story, because it's far more entertaining to get the story from him. But what I get from the story when he tells it is that I was conceited because he talked a lot and he told me all about himself, to which I just sat back and listened. And he was like, she just sat back and didn't care. And
that is so his impression. Wow. Well, you have Hannah and I were just talking about this because she obviously knows you far better than I do. You guys are such good friends, but you have such a non-anxious presence.
Yeah.
And it seems like you have self-assurance, like you don't trip over yourself in insecurities. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Are you fairly
I would say
secure?
that's
Yeah. And so I can
accurate.
see where, I think self-assurance and non-anxious presence are like lots of things can be misunderstood and experienced incorrectly.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that he's like, because he would like nervously have just like divulged everything, and you're like, I don't need to do any of that right now.
That was exactly it. So I remember leaving coffee and calling my girlfriend and saying, he was a nice guy, but I don't think that'll work out.
Wow.
And I don't remember his feedback on that. But then a few weeks later, he was coming to town again, and I guess he's like, oh, we'll give it another try. And then we hit it off from there.
Wow. Were you a Cat season ticket holder at that point?
Yes.
And he was he at that point too?
No, he was kind of undecided. Like,
Oh, really? Wow.
I think he was kind of in between. Am I a Bobcat or a Grizzly? So
Wow, because he's like Mr. Bobcat now.
yeah, I didn't really give him an option.
Wow. Huh. So he inherited your season tickets.
He did.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So you bring all of that background, you end up in Helena. What were the parts of Narrate that resonated for you, and what were the parts that you're like, nah, I'm not sure?
I don't think there was any not sures. Tony and I did, like, we talked about it, like, where are we going to go to church? And honestly, I
Because
didn't
he wasn't there, right?
No.
Yeah, okay.
And I didn't even know about Narrate, not even from Journey, which was surprising to me. So we went to a couple churches, and they just didn't fit for me. They were just too... I don't mean to sound in a bad way, but they were kind of stuffy for me. And it was actually Lindsay and Chad.
Oh, wow. It's fantastic people.
Because they were friends with my girlfriend that introduced Tony and I.
Okay.
So
They're
Lindsay
friends
was
with
like,
everybody.
yeah.
She could be the mayor of Helena.
Yeah. So Lindsay just said, oh, if you went to church at Journey, you'll fit right in at Narrate. So that's how we came to Narrate. And coming from Journey, I loved the smaller community atmosphere of Narrate versus Journey. Because you can get lost in a church that's that big.
It's massive, yeah.
Yeah.
But people either love that or hate it when they come from something like that to something like this.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that was instant, but if I'm in Bozeman and I go to Journey now, I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on here.
Right. Yeah. So that was in 2015. How has the way you experienced Jesus changed since you and Tony got married and being in Helena, or has it?
It's definitely changed knowing Tony, because I'm a very, I'll read and I love to learn, but I don't remember books. I don't remember titles. I don't remember verses when I read something or take something in. What stays with me is the ideas.
Okay.
And how to...
All the details not important.
Yeah,
What is your Enneagram? Do you know?
I don't know. I have no
Okay.
idea.
Huh.
So I don't typically remember details. I remember ideals and, how I think I'm going to work things like that into my life. Whereas Tony, he very much values, reading his Bible every day. And, I would never play Bible trivia with him because it's just amazing how much he knows and just can recite. And so I feel like in many ways we balance each other, but that's a way where, he's helped me grow in just like my own, I guess, habits.
Because you've just had, I'm going to put words in your mouth, so reject them if they're not accurate, but I'm wondering if, like, your non-anxious way of being in the world also shows up in your relationship with God. Just a relaxed, it's there, which is a gift, I think, in many ways. But he's then introduced you to disciplines and practices, is that?
Yeah, like, he gets up every morning and he has his chair time, and I'm not that person, It might be when I'm taking a walk at lunch, or it might be I get home at night and the day's done and I just turn everything off and I sit on the couch by myself. It's not the same time every day. It's not routine, but he's more routine, and I've never been good about just sitting down with the Bible and reading. I will at times here and there, but it's not routine. Yeah. And he's also so good about that.
I love that, though, because it's not, I feel like I know you well enough to be able to say it's not, that's not a lack of sincerity. It's just, it just shows up differently. Yeah. Which, as I'm studying the Trinity more and more, it just, that aspect of the Trinity just keeps coming up. In fact, Hannah inspired me to reread the Screw Tape Letters again, and that's actually something he says in there, is this idea that I'm not going to try to do it in that weird kind of upside down way that he says everything in that book, because you have to figure out what voice is speaking, but more or less what he's saying is that, like, God values diversity and he values people being different, and he's not a homogenous, which is refreshing to me. But I think we all fall in love with a certain way of practicing in a certain tradition and then assume that needs to work for everybody, and if you're not doing it that way, it's wrong. Not saying that's what Tony was doing, but
yeah,
I think that's a really neat, that you guys have found that balance, and yet mutuality, where it sounds like you're learning from him and probably him from you.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, just in a lot of aspects. Because whatever our Enneagrams are, or DISC, or whatever they are, I would place a lot of money that we are the opposites.
Yeah. So do you ever have moments where you're like, I made this so much harder by marrying an opposite? I'm not asking you to say you regret your husband on podcast, but I just mean, like, because it's something that married, Teresa and I have this conversation of, like, why do opposites marry? And then she'll often say, but in the second and third marriage, I don't think they do. But I'm not sure that she's right.
Easier in that we compensate for each other. The hard part would be just sometimes it's frustrating. When I met him, he probably cleaned his house 3 times a week, and I'm like, no, not necessary. Yeah. Little things like that, but it's great that he keeps us organized and everything planned. But then, if I'm the type of person that we're going to go on a trip and I want to wing it, and now I have to plan it, that could sometimes be frustrating to me. Like, why are we planning this? We'll just get there and we'll do it.
And he's like, because I'll have.
But that makes him very uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, he and I are obviously a lot alike, but But it's, again, refreshing to hear that you've done the work and you make that work, and it's probably a lot of your respective health with Jesus that makes it all work.
Yeah, and I think, looking back, we're coming up on 10 years, and I just look back and I feel like every year we figured out more, and it just gets better.
I've had people for whom I have a lot of respect say the hardest thing they've ever had to do in life was be a step-parent. Has that been your experience?
No.
Really?
That was just, I think when I prayed to God, that for someone to be in my life with me, I got Tony and Katie.
Wow.
And that was like, we have a great relationship.
It
was such a gift.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Assuming she knows that.
I think so. I hope so.
She speaks very highly of you as well.
Yeah.
So. I understand that to be a rarity, though, because she was still in high school when you met him.
Yeah, and that was one of the big reasons that we ended up in Helena and not in Bozeman, because I had a company when Tony and I met,
right? And
I'd been there for 17, 18 years, whatever it was. So it was a big decision to say, like, hey, I'm going to step out of this and sell my shares, and I don't know what I'm going to do next in life. But Katie she was a freshman in high school, and, that's a hard time to uproot someone and take them to a different town. So, and I had done what I had done for a long time. And
wow.
It's like, let's try something different.
Did you hit it off right away? Because you're like 1% of people. If you, like, step into this girl's house, take her dad, and she's just like, welcome.
I think she just kind of sat back and observed for a little while
Okay.
to form how she felt about it. I don't know. I've never really asked her about that, but I can't remember any time in the beginning that it was ever
Wow.
bad. And I knew that going in, you know, a teenage girl, like, I feel like that's going to go one way or another.
Huh.
Right? It's either
Yeah.
going to go great or not so great, but
I suppose your young life background probably helped you there too then.
maybe. Yeah.
Huh.
But
So, thinking about just your role on council too, which we'll get into, like, I guess some of that. But I'm curious, and I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm just fishing for honesty. So the good and the bad of that you've been there since 2015 also says that you've watched Hannah and I and the rest of the staff like lead Narrate through a lot of change, like how we show up, especially on a Sunday. I think is in some ways a lot different than what you showed up to in 2015. What parts of that resonated naturally, and which parts of that have you had to work to connect with, and which parts of that are you like, no, I still don't really connect with that? Does that make sense? Because I'm really fascinated by, to me, Narrate, the current community. It feels like we're getting close to the point where about half of the people there on a Sunday are those who they don't know 2015 Narrate.
mm-hmm.
And then another, if it is actually half, I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it seems like it's close to that. The other half are people like yourselves who, what they knew Narrate to be really pre-COVID, and in some ways what we are today. My perception are quite a bit different. And maybe that's part of it, is you're like, I don't even perceive that. But just like, I'd love to hear you speak to how you've abided in the changes that have happened since you've been here.
I don't think I don't want to say I don't recognize changes, but I don't think the changes that have happened to Narrate over the years I've been here have been very impactful to me. To me, like, my experience at Narrate in 2015 to my experience now is fairly the same.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, there's just so much I connect with and just feels so natural to me. But I also think that I've grown spiritually in the same way that the church is going, to be more, intentional about ancient faith and bringing that in. And I don't know if my growth is because of changes in the church or because of my relationship with my husband. It could be a lot of factors, but I feel like my spiritual growth has mirrored what's going on in Narrate. So maybe for that reason, I don't notice changes as much. But and the things I really value at Narrate have been a constant. Like, I just love connecting with people. That's like something that just brings me joy and brings me energy. So the community that Narrate is, that people gather together, they scatter together, we're owners and we help create the experience every Sunday. Those have maintained. So those being the things that are really valuable to me, there's not much of a change in my mind, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my head and probably my ego goes to like all the silly videos we used to produce, and like I guess that's one of the things that stands out the most. So it's interesting that that's like not even on your radar, or that we do communion every week now, and we used to do it once a quarter probably.
Yeah, and I think that's, I don't know, like I said, maybe that's helped me to grow spiritually, or maybe it's other factors, or probably both. And I don't think the experience is that for everybody.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and that's part of what's changed as well, is in 2015, to the extent that you were looking for a church that was providing a service like we were providing, we're almost literally, if not literally, the only place in town doing it. And part of what I celebrate now is that's not true anymore. I think there's always been lots of good churches in town, but that kind of late modern non-denominational mega church kind of vibe, there's several good churches in town doing that now. So I think on the one hand that's freed us up a little bit, and then on the other, I don't know, it's just that's part of what fascinates me right now about Narrate, is just the different stories kind of coming together. And that's where I'm like, man, I had no idea that you came from a Roman Catholic background, because in some sense that's somewhat consistent. It does seem like there's, for sure now, like we're seeing more and more of the new families are often people who are split. One was raised Roman Catholic, one was raised non-denominational. And anyway, I don't know. Can't understand it or control it. Just try to sit with it, but also steward it, which is part of then your kind of current spiritual leadership role as you stepped onto the council. Has it been even 6 months at this point? When I've everything's so muddy in my head.
It's funny, I was just looking back to see when our first meeting was, and it's been less than 6 months. I feel like it was end of summer. Yeah,
that seems about right.
Yeah.
Because then you came to a meeting and just kind of felt it out. And how has being on council changed anything for you, or the way you experience a Sunday, or the way you walk in the room? Or
I don't think it's really changed much. I stay fairly involved in the church, I guess. Just fairly, different scattering events and
covering for Hannah, which is no small task when she's gone.
Yeah, covering for Hannah. So I feel like, I guess I don't feel like much has changed. I feel like it's just another growth opportunity that God's put in front of me.
Yeah.
So
you brought a lot of value to that room. I think we've talked a little bit about, but quite frankly, it was like a family struggling with a lack of gym, and you entering into that room I think helped us just kind of turn the page. And that's not to say you also haven't brought a lot of your presence there is very good. You're not a fly on the wall. You do offer things. You're self-assured and courageous in those, but also not overbearing. And I genuinely think you've served as kind of a salve for the rest of us to just kind of turn that page. And I would argue even this last meeting this week, you could kind of feel that. And I don't know if you felt that, but our meetings have been slightly strained, in my opinion, for a year. I think a lot of that is grief and all these different things, and this C4SO thing that I've brought to the table. And that meeting this week just felt so unstrained. And
well, that's good.
I think a lot of that credit goes to everybody in the Holy Spirit, but also just how you've led us through change. So now you're kind of executive leadership at the State Fund. Is that the right way to say that?
Not executive leadership, but I'm in a management role.
You sit in a lot of board meetings and management.
I sit in a lot of meetings.
Yeah. So because the average person listening probably has no sense of what a council meeting, which potentially sounds so big and ominous. How has your experience in those meetings been what you expected, and how has it been different than maybe what you expected?
Since I was able to talk to you about it beforehand, I felt like I had a pretty good idea. And just knowing some of the council members, I think it's more... I wasn't sure what the content would be. It just, from not being on the council, it just seems like everything at Narrate just runs so smoothly.
Sure.
There's nothing really to talk about because it all is just going so well. So, I might have been a little surprised that there's there's things we actually really need to plan. Not that every organization doesn't need to plan really well, but it just, from the outside, it just seems like everything must really be in place and well planned out already. So
And so seeing, and they're like, no, there's a lot of work that goes into, or seeing that there's a effort to get that there.
Yeah.
Huh.
I guess it's not surprising to me, but, it just...
Yeah. It's definitely different. I mean, I think part of what's different for me is, and we've talked about this probably too, but just in the early days of council, we've always had good staff, but we haven't always had staff that's as experienced or just has such a long history, and frankly is mostly now in their 30s, not their 20s, and all those different things. And so, again, I think that's an area where you've helped us, because I think it's been a transition for all of us. I know it has for me, of just so many things now that used to go to the council, they don't, because we've got this long experience and a great staff, and we're here day in and day out together, so a lot of that stuff works out. So I feel like I'm still working out, and we're learning together, like what I know there's a place for council, that's really obvious, but also honoring and respecting everybody involved. I'm kind of rambling, but other than just to say, it's been, again, you've helped us, I think, find our way forward in this real kind of season of transition. Even though you would have fit from day one because of your leadership experience, your non-anxious presence, your just so many things. I think you would have fit in that room from the very beginning. And if I was planting a church again tomorrow, which I have no intention of ever doing again, I would build a council the same way, of find really good leaders, largely from the business sector, and just beg for them to guide and direct. And you would have fit with that well, but it does seem like we're now turning this corner a little bit. Anyway, that's probably relevant to what we're doing here, but thank you for jumping onto that team, and recognize it still takes a lot of time, and you already sit in a lot of meetings.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Like I said, I think it's valuable to me in a lot of ways, and if I can be helpful, that's also great. And I think the council, having been in a little while now and getting to know the rest of the council members better, it's just one of those teams that I feel like is a really great team, that has a lot of different experience, a lot of different strengths, because, to me, those are the best teams, the ones that, where someone's not strong, another person is, and they're going to pick up that piece, and they're going to bring the ideas that someone else might not have. But the other thing is just the amount of grace and respect in the room too. We're going to hear the ideas, we're going to listen to each other and come to conclusions the best we can, and then support that. There's, it's just a very cohesive group, it feels like.
Yeah, it's really special, for sure. Yeah. So you're walking the halls of the state fund, and someone stops you and says, "Hey, I heard you're a Christian. Why do you follow Jesus?" How do you answer that?
No one has ever stopped me in the hallway to say that, although I do get a lot of prayer requests at work.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. I follow Jesus because he's a guiding light in my life. He's purpose in my life. He, helps me through relationships, through really everyday life. He's my guidebook and my guiding light, I guess.
And for you, that goes way, way back, even though it's grown and changed, and that's really refreshing. Like, what do you make of the fact that you get so many prayer requests at work?
I think partly because I'm just a really open person. And if people ask me how my day was or what I did over the weekend, I don't even think to not include
Filter
anything. Like,
okay.
Oh, I volunteered at church this weekend, so I was doing that all morning on Sunday, or it's Ales for Trails, so I'm taking the day off and I'm going to do that, or I'm going to be off on Christmas Eve. So I feel like it's part of my regular conversations with people. I don't know if some people don't like that when they ask, "How's your day going?" and they really wanted a good and carry on. But I don't typically do that. So I think people just know that I am a Christian, so if something comes up, they'll ask. But I will also say there's, a group of women at work that I would say it's the same for them. And we all talk to each other about what we're praying for and what we're going through in life. And two of them are Roman Catholic and one of them is LDS.
Wow.
And I go to Narrate. But
that's awesome.
The fact that we practice differently is never even brought up. Like, those aren't the things we talk about. We talk about what we can pray for and how we can do it.
What makes sense to me about that is you have a very safe vibe to you, and probably part of it is you don't in the same way you're talking about your first date with Tony, like you're more guarded with your words, so that also would make you more trustworthy, because I think people would naturally trust that you're not gonna betray their confidence, but also you have this. I mean, I remember even when we were processing counsel, and I was like, it was more or less these questions around, at times there's things that you have to emotionally handle, because you are dealing with stuff sometimes, and you just were like, man, I can separate that.
Yeah.
So the fact that people pray, the prayer thing fascinates me also, just because, like in a predominantly secular world, that notion of prayer is still so present culturally, or at least the how would you say that, the acknowledgement of it. That's where Teresa was asking, not trying to sell the daily office thing we did yesterday, but she was like, how was that? And I was like, this is new for me too, but the part that was refreshing about that to me was, I go back to a message from a few years ago that was born of this, like, is prayer a productive activity? And I really do in my bones believe that it is. And I can't really relate to the person who can't get up and make it to the gym. Like, I know that's productive and therefore I'm going to do it. But prayer would be one of those for me of like, I know it's productive, and I just spent 2 hours this morning working on the sermon, but I didn't, despite that I had several inclinations to get on my knees and pray for the sermon, I didn't do that. Like, it's hard work, and it's hard. I respect that it's important work, but it's not work that I'm good at doing. And there was something about walking away from that half an hour and not reflecting on what did I learn, or what way was I like intellectually stimulated, or what kind of emotive experience did I have with God, but more of this, like, maybe the way that I feel on scattering sometimes, of just this, but I just did something productive, and I did something that's actually hard, and that was really rewarding. My own little soapbox about it, but so I'm curious to see the long game of that.
I was going to ask how that went.
Well, because it's interesting that Teresa and I are talking like people who struggle to exercise on their own have no issue going to a class, and that's not disingenuous exercise. But I think our Protestant, especially evangelical inclination is, but if I'm praying somebody else's words and I'm doing it in a group, it's not genuine. But we don't apply that to so many other areas where we go, no, if you've got to go do this in community, then do it in community, because it's that important. It's just a weird, I think it flips over a lot of rocks for me, that I'm curious to see where they go. And then even we read, was it like Isaiah 46 and a couple Psalms and the who is your neighbor story from Luke. And I also had this slightly judgmental experience of, like, we're not that far from the Protestant Reformation, which was largely about Christianity has become so detached from Scripture. And I couldn't help but think that for the 21 people sitting in that room, I'll bet you for a good percentage of them, like, they just read more Scripture outside of Sunday than maybe cumulatively in all of 2024. And what would be the cumulative impact of just those types of experiences? Man, because I think you do the New Testament every year and the Psalms every 60 days and the Old Testament every 2 years. Anyway, so I'm trying not to analyze it, but I thought it was special, without any judgment for where it's going to go or who does or does not ever attend.
And likening it to your talking about exercise, that comparison, Like sometimes it's hard to get yourself to do something, but you get done with it and you're like, wow, so rewarding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But not in a, I think for me, so much of Christian faith is, it's analyzed, quite frankly, through this like personal, like euphoric metric. And that was more like Ales for Trails. Like left to myself, I would love to not do Ales for Trails, right? Like I don't need that event to enjoy a good beer and friends. But the outcome of it is what makes it so worthwhile. And the outcome is not getting people to church, it's all the community stuff, right? And that's the way yesterday felt, was I trust that there's outcomes from this that are way bigger than myself, and I just got to be a participant in. I remember the first time I heard Father Mark say at a mass, at the end of the mass, he said, actually it was at the end of, I think it was at the end of one of the Everett Casey's wedding. At the very end, he said, "Well done, you've prayed well."
Oh.
And that was paradigm shifting for me, of like, whoa, that is part of what we're supposed to be doing here, isn't it? It's this like Care Bear stare into the kingdom.
Yeah.
Anything else that I didn't touch on that you were hoping to touch on?
I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you for doing. I mean, this is, you bring so much value to us and to Narrate and to the whole crew and lots of people personally and the council now, and so thank you. It's really a privilege, and to get to. I love interacting with, because I come at life more like your husband. It's refreshing to interact with people like yourself who also have strong connections but go about it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's reciprocal.
Yeah, thanks.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.